All right, good morning, everybody. It is 10:30. I know that I am the last presentation of the day, and I am between everybody and lunch, and also your weekend, so maybe a beer at lunch. So I am so happy to be here today on Earth Day. I am very proud to be the last presentation. I don't mind, because I like to say that this is, leading into the future, and I'd like to leave you with some great leave-behinds on how to build better for a more sustainable future. My name is Amy Pastor. I'm the Vice President of Sustainability for EXP. Even though today I am in that executive level, I spent the last 16 years of my career as a mechanical engineer, as a commissioning agent, as an energy auditor, boots on the ground, and have just really, through those experiences, understood the importance of energy management and how we need to make sure we are not only building better, but we are leaving behind a building that is allowed to be maintained, operated for a more sustainable future. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. So I'm going to quickly go through AIA. This is accredited. You'll get your points. Make sure you check in on the app. But really, from a buildings perspective, we see that there are rating systems, and we're going to talk a little bit about LEED. We're going to talk about WELL. We see that there are code requirements for commissioning, but it's all new buildings. And one thing I like to say, and it's a statement that people look at me and say, well, duh, but 100% of the buildings today are existing buildings. So every building that's built today is an existing building. And what are we doing about it? What are we doing to make sure that we are operating it efficiently, and also, reducing greenhouse gas emissions? So we'll talk a little bit about how we're changing the language of what we've been doing for the last 20, 30, 40 years. So a lot of this stuff isn't new. It's just learning the new lingo that you're seeing in all those executive orders. So my learning objectives today: understand commissioning requirements of select green building certification, opportunities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Let's do a couple quick case studies. Again, a lot of low-hanging fruit items. But then ways to integrate commissioning and sustainability into each project, and then finally planning for future of commissioning energy audits as they relate to sustainability. So there is my agenda. Working recently on a lot of federal proposals because of those executive orders, those mandates by GSA, by the White House. There's a press release every single day that comes out about the next thing. What's the next thing? Where's the IIJA money going, those billions of dollars? And I've learned that you need to have a good acronym table, because if you don't define all your acronyms, people may not know what you're talking about. So this is just up there. Really the key ones. I'm going to talk about LEED, which is Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. Building design and construction is the new construction rating system. O&M is the existing building. BECX, building envelope. I feel really bad. I know there was a couple sessions on building envelope, but we don't get to often talk about that. Same thing about electrical commissioning and monitoring-based commissioning. It's in there. It's important, and we'll talk about why. And then some of the other key acronyms, when we start to get into the rating system a little bit, you'll see that there's the OPR, owner project requirements, basis of design, and just CFR, current facilities requirements. And then when I get into my greenhouse gas emissions, GHGs, primarily talking about CO2, but there are others. And then UNGC, UN Global Compact. So when we start to talk about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, I'll just start rambling off letters and numbers, but so that's why you know what they are when I'm talking about that. And then ESGs, environmental, social, and governance. So let's start with the most familiar, I think most people are familiar with. There's the LEED rating system. And the LEED, it's now building design and construction. It used to be LEED version 1, 2, 3, 4. New construction, it's called building design and construction. And then within that subset, there is new construction, and then additional subsets for data centers, hospitality, healthcare. But really, it's all the same thing. It's new buildings. And for fundamental commissioning, the intent is to support the design, construction, and eventual operations of a project. So it's a new construction project, but right in the description we're talking about that it's the eventual operation of a project to meet those OPR for energy, water, IEQ, and durability requirements. And then the contract, talk about contracting, because it's changed. It literally changes every 6 months who can be the CXA on a LEED project. It can be somebody on your design team as long as they are a disinterested party. So it cannot be your MEP of record, but it could be a commissioning agent that is within your organization. Design. It's important to be involved early so that your commissioning agent could be involved in the design process and in helping to write those owner's project requirements, look at the basis of design, and then make sure that the building, when it comes to the commissioning phase, will be able to operate and maintain. It'll be able to pass the commissioning test that we're all familiar with doing. And then you're going to want to have them to review the design documents as well. And the systems to be commissioned are typical HVAC, lighting, our domestic hot water. We also start to look at our renewable energy systems, and then our electrical. So in LEED version 4, which is that BD+C, they've actually started to include in the fundamental requirements, it's going to be all of your large generators, all of your UPS, your ATS. So electrical commissioning is required, and it's important because that's what's generating the electricity. It's also, God bless you. Also starts to talk about metering systems in there. And then finally, building envelope. It's only covered in the OPR. We'll talk about why when we get to the credit, but those are the required systems to be commissioned. And what do? What does a commissioning agent do? Well, we're going to write a plan. We're going to present that plan. We're going to execute the plan. And then we're going to document what we did. That's really it. I mean, there's a long list there, but that's really what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the process of what we are doing. Enhanced commissioning builds on it. It's an easy credit. You get 3 points for it. But really what you're doing is further supporting the design, construction, and eventual operations of the project. And what I love about the enhanced commissioning credit is you start to see where we morph from new construction and how we're going to make the building operate better, because you are going to give some key leave-behinds, which are those O&M manuals, those training plans. In the new version of the rating system, we start talking about an ongoing commissioning plan. And hopefully this document isn't something that just sits on a shelf. You know, you're trying to leave behind something that could be maintained, operated, maintained, and give you a better building. It's, like I said, it's worth 3 points in the rating system, so you'll see that a lot of people will add this to any LEED project because as commissioning agents, I mean, how many people aren't, raise your hands here, who's writing commissioning tests here? So how many people in here are actually writing functional performance tests? Are you looking at the submittals that are coming in when you're writing the commissioning tests? Okay. Are you sometimes looking at O&Ms? You probably look, you may or may not. You always are. I love you. But I mean, some of these documents are already things that you're doing as part of your commissioning process. So why not? That's a value add to your owner, because now you're doing these things, you're documenting that you've done them, and then you're giving them they're giving them a great leave behind. So then when we start to get to, that's path 1. So LEED likes to complicate things over time, and I'm LEED proven provider. I've worked on over 200 projects. I love LEED, but it gets complicated sometimes. So let's now have 3 paths to enhanced commissioning, as opposed to just saying, can you guys just do this stuff? You're already doing it, okay? But now we have the Enhanced Plus, and the Enhanced Plus is the monitoring-based commissioning. So again, if you don't know what your building is doing, how can you work those ongoing commissioning plans? How can you make sure you're operating and maintaining your building efficiently? So monitoring-based commissioning is, again, a value add. It starts to get you out of, hey, we've built a building, but now we want to make that building operate more efficiently. We want to see how it's doing over time. We want to do preventative and predictive maintenance. So maybe your trends start to pick up on a blip. Or if you're monitoring your water, you see that there's a leak because you have, it's not just your water bills, but now you can dive down to which line has that problem. And then finally, it benefits buildings that pursued LEED O&M. So O&M is the existing buildings rating system that we're going to talk about next. But when you have the monitoring-based commissioning available, it makes that process easier. And while today we are not mandating that buildings go through a retro commissioning process or that LEED new construction does get recertified, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So why not do it? Why not be informed? Why not know what your building is doing? So building envelope commissioning, this is it's an extra credit within the rating system. But I mean, how important? I mean, I'm looking back 20 some years ago, we weren't talking about building envelope commissioning, because that is, I mean, if you don't have a tight envelope, How are you knowing, like, your HVAC systems are performed and designed to meet the envelope requirements of the building. You're doing an energy model that has R values and U values. You're assuming infiltration rates. Well, why not make sure that those infiltration rates are correct? So that when you can calibrate that model, you'll know if there's a problem with the envelope or with the systems. And then, so I talked about the fundamental commissioning. All you're doing is saying that, hey, we've looked at the fact that an envelope exists. We've looked at the R values, they meet all the codes. But what we're talking about for the actual commissioning is you are looking at that air and water infiltration. You may be lucky enough to be on site when they're spraying the hose at the building. That's pretty cool. You can do something as simple as take thermal imaging is also a great way to see where there's leaks in your building. And then also if you have daylight glare control, that will also be something that your building envelope commissioning agent will look at. So how many people in here have worked on a well project? Couple, show of hands, okay. Well is interesting because well talks about, it's more the better building for the person, the inside of the building. So there are no MEP commissioning requirements, prerequisites or preconditions or optimizations, they're not credits, they're optimizations within the well rating system. The only optimization is for building envelope. So I may have some test and balance folks in here too, right? So maybe, test and balance and operations is much more important. Well, there is a recertification and you'll have to do water quality, air quality testing. You'll have to make sure that you're proving the maintenance. You actually have the records that you've changed filters and what types of filters that you used. So Wade, that's gonna be the next iteration of your ASHRAE paper with the filtration. So the guidance is limited. It really, I shouldn't say limited, it leads you back to ASHRAE and NIBS guidelines, so the Building Sciences Standard or guideline for new construction. And it also just ensures that the process is performed by an independent professional who's, again, a disinterested party in that project. And here's just a list of some of the things that they as the commissioning agent would be required to do. And there is a commissioning plan. So there's a building envelope commissioning plan. There's not an MEP system commissioning plan. So now we're going from rating systems, optional, to code. Mandatory? Question mark. Enforced? Question mark. All right. I think we can all talk about that over a beer one time, but really it's IECC has code minimum commissioning that's required. It is can be performed by in-house staff. You can hire a third party to do it. And then there's also some guidelines. So again, 2018 IECC G4 is a guideline for commissioning. It's not really enforceable. IECC section C408 is systems commissioning. Again, is it being enforced? There's a lot of exceptions that people seem to get around. And it depends on your AHJ. If your AHJ really is enforcing code commissioning, great. If not, I'm guaranteeing it's a value add for all of you who are working on design projects saying, where's commissioning? We can do it. Here's $10,000, $20,000. Because at some point an AHJ is going to mandate it. We're going to talk about policy changes soon here too. So here's what's required for code commissioning. Very simple. MP lighting controls. You're going to write a plan. You're going to verify test and balance has been done. Wait, your building has been balanced. So now you have to execute a couple functional performance tests. Perfect. So now again, you have that final report. It's a leave behind for the owner to understand how the building is operating. We sit here in Florida, but how many people have worked in California? Done work in California? Yeah, lots of people. Title 24 commissioning is awesome. It basically aligns with LEED commissioning with a few exceptions, but it's required for anything over 10,000 square foot. If it's under, you still have to do a design review and some minimum, I'll say design phase commissioning, but it's not the full process and the forms. But retro commissioning is still not required. That's a pain point of mine. That's okay. But what I also love about Title 24 commissioning is they start to look at water irrigation. So it's not, we have reclaim here. I'm on a reclaim line at my house. There's not always reclaim at some of the sites in California. So it is very critical that you test the irrigation line, because water has a carbon element too. And when you're talking about greenhouse gas emissions reduction, carbon reductions, water needs to be included in that equation. So what about existing buildings? LEED O&M is the existing buildings rating system within USGBC. And what it does is it promotes the continuity of information to ensure that energy efficient operating strategies are maintained and provide a foundation for training and system analysis. So what does that really mean? It means we're doing energy audits. From a prerequisite standpoint, you're going to document what's currently going on in the facility. You're going to look at the O&Ms. You're going to create an implementation plan. And again, this is the prerequisite. So it's really an ASHRAE level 1 energy audit. You're just doing a drive through the building, a walk through hopefully. If you're driving, maybe it's an electric vehicle car. But you're really trying to set the building up for success so that when you get into the credits, you can actually start analyzing the system. So now you've done all your research, you've gotten the plan, and now you're going to execute on that plan. So the first credit that is available is the analysis phase, which can be 2 options: existing building commissioning and energy audits. So how many people can tell me the difference? Or better question, isn't that kind of the same thing? Kinda. Yeah, there's a little bit of difference. It depends on who you ask. When you start to break down what actually happens during that analysis phase, you're still defining the process for reviewing and prioritizing your ECMs, your energy conservation measures. You are again creating and reviewing that implementation strategy. From an existing buildings commissioning standpoint, you're updating that current facilities requirement because you've probably done something that's now changed how the facility is operating. But when you get to the energy audit side, you start to go back to ASHRAE, and they point you back to the ASHRAE level 2 audits. And then further, if you are doing existing building commissioning, you actually are going to develop those test procedures. You're going to get back to my slides here. I can't see that far. Forgot my reading glasses. You're going to determine criteria for evaluating and prioritizing those opportunities, so those energy conservation measures. And then you're going to execute those CX plan and the documents that you created. If you go on the energy audit side, this is where you're going to determine an approach for, analyzing the facility. You're actually going to walk through and do a deeper dive into those systems and find where those low-hanging fruit and those energy audit savings will be. You then get a point for implementing anything that you found. Again, these are just the list of requirements. You start to provide training, you develop a 5-year plan, you develop a budget, and then you help to, again, update the documents so that the owner knows how the building is operating. So finally, we get to ongoing commissioning, which is, and I'm going to skip to the slide ahead, this is actually taking your analysis, your implementation, you're taking that ongoing commissioning plan, you are developing your functional performance tests, and you are doing this, and you're setting a timeline for how often the ongoing commissioning should happen. Usually it's 2 years. I like to see 1. LEED requires, I think it's 2 today. I know it's changed a couple times, and they've had some, when you do the recertification, there's actually a timeline that you have to look at. So then finally, it's a reporting process, quarterly, annually. We like to say, at least annually. Talk about LEED. I talk about code requirements for the new construction. How many people can tell me? Because I look, and today this could be wrong. This isn't wrong today, but it could be wrong tomorrow. IEC doesn't require existing building commissioning, unless you are doing a tenant fit out. So unless you're touching those systems and you're updating the systems, you don't have to go in every year and do that ongoing commissioning plan. Title 24 doesn't require it either. And that's a problem, because what was one of the things I said? It's 100% of the buildings today in existence are existing buildings. I was just in Chicago this week, yesterday, and I had this slide because I presented it to my team up there, and I said, if you don't think climate change is real, I don't care, right, left. There's too many facts out there, and it's a race that we're currently losing. but it doesn't mean we have to lose it. We can still win. And I had a quote here. I'm scrolling down to my notes here, excuse me. But it says, no corner of the globe is immune from the devastating consequences of climate change. Rising temperatures are fueling environmental degradation, natural disasters, food and water insecurity. So now we start talking about more than environmental. We start to talk about that social, the governance, all the environment, the justice piece of it, economic disruption and conflict. Sea levels are rising, the Arctic is melting, coral reefs are dying. And there's more to that quote, but I mean, the reality is, if we don't do something in our existing buildings, if we don't mitigate the risks of climate change through what we are best at, which is that energy management, we are not going to have a better future for our next generation and the next generation and the next generation. We're going to be gone, right? We're going to be gone. Hopefully not tomorrow, but we're going to be gone in 50 years, 60 years, 100 years. But our next generation is going to be here, and we cannot leave this world worse than when we came into it. So ESGs, environmental, social, governance. Environmental issues are the things that we typically play in the world of commissioning. But when you start to look at the Sustainable Development Goals, social and governance are critical elements in that environmental and that climate change. Because we start to talk about social and people, and then governance, as we start to talk about the policy and advocating for the policy to make changes so that we can help those people who don't want to make the change. We can mandate it. I know, I'll say it. I want to mandate it. I do, because that might be the only way we're going to start to move the needle on climate change. Sustainable Development Goals, 1 through 17, they are in no particular order. So, no poverty all the way down through life on land is number 15. This is the framework that has been developed by the UN Global Compact, Sustainable Development Goals, that many of your clients, many of the people we work for, are using as guidelines for their corporate sustainability, for their ESG reporting. And I like this graphic better because it starts to show you which ones are specifically environmental, which ones are social, and which ones are governance. As engineers, as architects, as MEP, as everybody in this room, like I said, we're usually in that environmental world because we're talking about industrial, we're talking about innovation, we're talking about climate action. But we start to see, and you'll see this as we go through, that we have an impact on those social and governance. So what's the importance of greenhouse gas emissions, climate crisis? I've already talked about that. Reducing energy consumption and demand. Cost savings, right? Follow the money. If we can save energy and we can save water, our clients' energy bills, their water bills are going to go down, so they're going to save energy. We're talking about expansions and renovations, added capacity. So if you go in and do an energy audit and you realize that you're operating inefficiently and you could save 25%, I'm throwing numbers out there. So 25% because you didn't have your that's going to increase energy. You had your outside air damper closed, but your lights were happened. You have your lights are on all the time. You didn't check your schedule. Say you saved 25%. Well, maybe that helps deferred maintenance. It helps, or you can put that project, that capital project, in a future budget because now you're trying to find ways and to rethink what you're doing with retrofits. You don't have to buy a new piece of equipment because you found added capacity. And then just a little bit more about SDG 7, which is affordable and clean energy, and then I'm also going to talk about SDG 13, which is climate action. But here are some of the targets, and the one that I think is most important for you, because I'm a businesswoman, okay, what's my competitive advantage? That's always what I'm thinking. So how am I going to sell this to my clients? By 2030, we need to double the global rate of improvement in energy efficiency. 8 years from now, that's the target. So everybody's gonna have at least, it's more than, we gotta hurry up, that's all I'm saying. And then we're also, we start to see, I talk about executive orders and we see the funding that's coming out. We're seeing that the money is going towards clean energy. So it's not just us and what we're doing on our site, it's also going to be the source of that energy and making sure it's clean, so that when we do build better, and we start to electrify our buildings because everybody wants to go away from greenhouse gas emissions, we at least have clean energy coming to the site. Sorry, I didn't switch my slide for you guys. That's the one. I'm on two windows here. All right, so global emissions, so SDG 13, global emissions of CO2 has increased by almost 50% since 1990. So in the last 30 years, we have almost doubled our CO2. Emissions, they grew more quickly between 2000 and 2010 than in the previous 3 decades. So does anybody remember what happened in that decade? At least locally, they were building a ton of homes. Because I remember I moved down here in 2005 and everybody had a brand new home because they were building it, and then the economy crashed. So, but we built a lot. We built a lot in that decade. So here are some of the targets that we talked about. Strengthen resilience and adaptive capability to climate-related hazards and natural disasters in all countries. We really start to integrate climate change measures into our national policies and strategies and planning. So this is where I start to look at saying, okay, well, the ESG is all linked because we're talking about policy now, which policy is governance. And do you have any football fans out there? This is not a really badly coordinated play, okay? This is, like, this is my running backs route, you know? No, it's just to show that, you know, the environmental goals that we're looking at, and I said there's 5. I mean, we can look at all 8, but when you look at climate action and when you look at industry and innovation and infrastructure, that one is linked to all 3 ESGs. Climate action, governance. Right? So we're talking about policy change. We have to make a policy change. And, you know, for those who would work with the federal government and know where the funding is coming from, we have executive orders. But this one to me is the most impactful. So the Securities Exchange Commission, it's currently it's currently proposed, it's going through review, is going to amend the Securities Act of 1933 and Securities Exchange Act of 1934. So almost 100 years ago. And it's going to require that registrants release the risks, their climate risks, that are reasonably likely to have a material impact on its business, results of operation, and financial condition, including the disclosure of their greenhouse gas emissions. So if you're working for a publicly traded company and this goes through, every single publicly traded company is going to be issuing an ESG report. Everybody start writing your proposals now, okay? Because so scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions is what they'll report on. Scope 1 is the site, that's what's happening in their building. Scope 2 is the source, what's coming from the energy sources. And then scope 3 is their supply chain. Well, we are our client's supply chain. So that's another thing too. I don't care if you're publicly traded or you're private, you will be writing an ESG report or tracking your energy and water usage as well. So here's a few simple things, and I say this because I've been to a couple presentations, I've been to these before, I've been to these for several years. We talk about the same thing. Calibrate your sensors. Low-hanging fruit, you're gonna see, you know, temperature, humidity, water, there's wasted energy. Calibrate your sensors. Interrogate the BAS. Pretend like you're a detective on Law and Order and ask it really hard questions. What are you doing? Are those schedules right? Is your equipment, is it operating the right sequences? Again, easy stuff that we've been talking about, but we have to change the language of it. And we're not talking about energy reductions anymore. We're talking about carbon emissions reductions. So it's still the same thing you've been doing, but you have to change your language. And then your clients are saying, oh, you've been doing this for us. Come back in and redo it. Lighting controls, another one. We always pick on lighting. You know, it's easy. Turn the light off. Come on, guys. Water uses carbon, or there's a carbon associated with water, so we need to look at leaks. Water sense labeling, there are tens and thousands of available resources now, or available fixtures that meet the water sense label. Amanda, I think Sarah even said, like, it took her like 3 days to find something one time, and then she found it in like 2 hours with whatever database she was using. So I mean, it's so easy to find these, you know, just a simple replacement for a low cost item. So now I've talked about, you guys have been doing this, but maybe nobody knows how to quantify greenhouse gas emissions. It's important to know. I didn't know, okay? I didn't know. I was like, yeah, I just told you how much energy you're saving. Well, that doesn't matter. You have to equate it to carbon. So your ECMs We need to just convert that to a unit of energy. You've got it. You've got cost savings if you want to. Gallons of gas, kilowatt hours of electricity, therms of natural gas if you still have it in the building. I'm going to, just a disclosure here, I did use EPA's when I do the example for calculation, but the transmission factors are a nationally weighted average, which means that it may not actually be reflective of the cleanliness of your grid. So it is always best to reach out to your utility provider and make sure if they have the data, they probably do, or they're going to in the near future, you may want to reach out to them to get their factor. So again, I keep picking on lighting. Thank goodness my friend in lighting isn't here, but it's an easy calculation, right? I don't have to put it in anything more than an Excel spreadsheet. So we have a 10,000 square foot building designed at 1 watt a square foot. Energy codes have changed, nobody's gone through retrofits, and we just cut that in half. We simply say, let's put it at half a watt a square foot, and you're saving 10,400 kilowatt hours of energy a year. So EPA has this amazing tool. It's called the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Calculator. You just plug in that 10,400. It's going to come up with the emissions factor that is the nationally weighted average one. Right now it's 0.0007 metric tons of carbon per kilowatt hour. And then voila, they give you your total metric tons from that savings. So now you can write in your reports, I've saved you 10,400 kilowatt hours, whatever, $3,000 and 7.4 metric tons of carbon. But again, we talk about the miles per, people know if I say I'm driving and I get 10 miles to the gallon and I get 30 miles to the gallon, you know if that's an efficient car or not. Well, you can't assume that your client knows if 7.4 metric tons is a lot. So what I like about EPA's tool is it gives you more relatable metrics to say. So that savings actually was the same as 17.1 barrels of oil consumed. Or you can charge almost 900,000 smartphones for that energy savings. And then further, you can look at greenhouse gas emissions avoided, things like incandescent lamps selected to LEDs, wind turbines running for a year, kind of a little bit. And then you can even go to carbon sequestered by trees. So it's about 122 tree seedlings grown for 10 years. Value add. So here's the most important things if there's anything that you take away from this. We are changing the vocabulary. We are no longer talking about energy conservation measures. We are. We just need to call it something different. We have to call it carbon reduction strategies. We also are looking at ways to provide a framework for our clients for energy transition plans. We know that the grid is not clean today. We know that there is, actually this morning, the White House released another, they've been putting out just releases that more funding is coming, more funding is coming. More funding is coming specifically for clean energy. They just released that this is where, they said this bucket of money is going for clean energy. So, when you're writing your energy transition plans, don't forget to factor that in. So if today your building is really, really efficient, you're a LEED Platinum building, which you're not using a lot of energy, you've got all the energy points. But when you start to transition that to greenhouse gas emissions, you may not be net zero carbon yet because you still have that grid impact. Don't discount that. In your report, say we think the grid is going to be here, so if the building continues to operate as efficiently as it is, we might be using less carbon in 10 years because they've transitioned from coal-fired plants to, it's a cleaner grid. They've gone to hydro. Again, we're talking about the SEC ruling. I really hope it goes through because I'd love to see those early adopters are going to be praised for what they're doing and they're not going to have any added work. And then we're going to see a lot more people moving towards, this vocabulary, this language. And then show me the money, right? So if anything, you're saving your clients money, even if they don't care about carbon, you're saving them money, which is always a value add. And what does the future hold? I think, me personally, I'm a big advocate for advocacy. So, we as better stewards of energy savings, as better stewards of the environment, just advocate for change and ask for action to happen. ASHRAE 90.1 2016 Appendix G is referenced in LEED version 4.1, which is in beta. It's the next version of LEED that will come out, or is out, that we mandate it. But the points are not only looking at energy cost saving, it starts to look at your carbon savings. So for folks who were using really efficient gas water heaters, and because it cost less and it changed the energy cost savings versus the energy consumption savings, they're going to be penalized for this. So it starts to look at both carbon savings and energy cost savings. I sit on the Energy and Atmosphere Technical Advisory Group for LEED, and we are, you can't stop. You have to look at what's next. And without getting into too many details, because I can't, we're starting to see that the energy and atmosphere credits really are going to start focusing more on carbon neutrality and carbon reduction strategies. So again, it's still the same things we've been doing, but we're going to change that vocabulary and talk about how we're saving carbon as opposed to saving energy. The proposals that are coming out, there's not enough consultants in this world to handle all the work that is coming out of all the money from the government. So when you're looking for proposals, change your vocabulary for business development and start to say, is somebody putting out a carbon reduction plan? Are they putting out an energy transition plan proposal? That's going to help you find those new business ideas, or those, expand your areas of services for your client, because they don't know this yet. And this is, again, a value-added proposition that you could give to them. And then finally, electrification of buildings. We're moving away from fossil fuels. Derek and I were talking about electrification a little bit. It's not necessarily the cleanest yet, but it could be. So that is just something else we're going to look forward to. So, questions and answers. Not quite 25 minutes, but.
Yes, ma'am. So you mentioned that there was a focus, or there will be a big focus on carbon neutrality instead of just energy optimization. So wooden buildings in locations where there is more of a renewable energy grid in place, they would be innately more sustainable by that metric?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of work in Toronto right now, and they are really pushing. They have a really clean grid, or a cleaner grid, and we actually opted to use the 90.1 2016 Appendix G for the energy model, because we showed a larger savings because of how low our carbon was. So we were getting all 9 points because we were a percent greater in the carbon reduction, and our energy cost was still pretty high. And then their energy transition plan, we're like, oh, in 10 years you're going to be 100% renewable, so we're good.
We do a lot of healthcare projects, and we always have to have standby power. What are the thoughts for non-carbon and standby power?
Healthcare is also interesting. This project in Toronto, it's a 1.2 million square foot healthcare facility. And we are using air source heat pumps for the design. We still have a traditional chiller plant. We still have backup, and we've tried to use an electric boiler where it's allowed by code. That you can't say that in certain states, electric boiler. But we really are, and geothermal is another option. So it's a hybrid system to make sure that there's enough redundancy that you don't lose those critical care areas like your operating rooms. And then, quite honestly, we are relying that in a couple of years, 5-10 years, their energy transition plan, they'll get to zero because the grid's going to be just a little bit cleaner.
Amy, I hear a lot of conversations lately about progressing to hydrogen. You're working all over. Do you bump into that, and do you have any thoughts on it?
We bump into it. It is a lot of talk right now. I think in certain areas it's going to be beneficial. I don't know that it's going to, we're looking at a wide variety of items, and personally, Amy talking. I took that from Wade. Amy talking. I don't think so. I don't think that we're going to go route. Because people are talking about nuclear again. Nuclear is great, I mean, but there's the fallout of that. So there's always pros and cons to it. I just don't personally see that that's gonna, I could be wrong. 20 years from now I'll be out of a job because it's on recording that I said it's.
Are you seeing the energy code enforced for commissioning? We haven't.
Nope.
Yeah.
Certain jurisdictions are,
We've had a few.
Orlando has really.
Some in Orlando.
Yeah.
One was the lighting. The guy was more electrical, and he's like, "Where's my lighting commissioning report? We're not passing you."
Yeah.
But out of the number of jobs, maybe 3 or 4, which is.
So what we did, and I like to give away all my secrets. I don't care. So we actually, because the IEC code minimum commissioning is so streamlined, we've actually said, well, let's make that a service, like in itself, that it's not this lead level commissioning. It's very basic functional performance test. I can say that in this room. It's, simple test. You're testing a sequence. You're not going to a level 5. You're not doing you're not pulling the plug and making sure that it's going to come back on. You're just testing the sequence. And we've presented that in even our MEP proposals to say, look, we realize that your building is going to need commissioning per the energy code. And it's in there. We've talked about it so that if later down the line they say, oh, we are being enforced, we've had a lot of people to say they're not enforcing that. Reedy Creek is another one. Reedy Creek is really down Disney. They're enforcing code commissioning on all those little ride projects that they have to do because they're all over the threshold.
In California, it's very sporadic. So I do jobs all through Northern California, through Southern California, and it just depends on the jurisdiction and the people working in the building department.
Yeah.
So like in Hanford County, which is out in the middle of nowhere, I got a phone call from a desperate architect and engineer that needed commissioning because they'd already issued, and it was like that. The one that I'm seeing enforced the most in California right now is Los Angeles County. Yeah. So that is the one where we've been getting more phone calls. But even then, it's still kind of funny. I've had one where they enforced it, and all they asked at the end of the job was for my commissioning plan. Yeah. So I said, oh, so I didn't have to test it, I didn't have to do that, I could just give you a plan and collect the check? So it really depends on where it's at.
And it's funny you say that about California because similar experience. You're sitting there saying that Title 24, they've got this whole thing in place. Well, not everything requires Title 24 commissioning. And the workarounds, the back doors that people try to take to not have to commission, I'm like, you're paying millions of dollars for a design. My value add to you, or my contract is going to be for like $10,000. It's a small fit out, but you're trying to do everything possible to not get me on your job.
That's been the reality that we've been dealing with.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate in DC, it's pretty much regulated heavy. It's tied to occupancy.
Yeah.
So you can't, without a commissioning report, you can't actually occupy.
Yeah.
Oh, you just struck a chord. What's interesting is they have this lighting acceptance testing in California, and that is strictly enforced. And I think that's so bizarre because that's what we're doing, but they'll enforce that, and that is tied to occupancy, and that is about the only one that's got any consistency. So I think tying to occupancy, that's the denominator.
Yeah, because they can't make money if people can't get into the building. That's right.
There's a couple clients that we have, I know you work with them, that require us as commissioning agents to sign off and say, and that is part of their occupancy package. So they're very, I like that because it's
Tailor it to the building type. So it's just not one size fits all.
That's
If you
right.
got a lab or a critical equipment, it's got to be tested, all tested, no issues. Classroom, okay, you tested it, good.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Actually, 90.1 does require commissioning licenses, but it's very rarely enforced. So I just wanted to point that out. We have the lighting controls and occupancy sensors, those type of things. And if they're not working properly.
That's correct. Yeah, and the other thing too is you've got lighting controls, so standalone. I walk in, the lights turn on, they go off. Then there's this whole, I mean, you can get into testing for like a network-based lighting control system. There's not the expertise, you know, so when I do it, I call our lighting group and I said, there's no way possible that I can do this commissioning on my own because I'm gonna screw it up. I need a lighting designer to commission that. So I think to that point, I think it's the educating and making sure it's the right person testing the system, and it's really critical. It's critical, especially with a network-based system.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious of your opinion. You mentioned that we have to double the rate of efficiency deployment by 2030. And that's a monumental task, right? Kind of where we're at now to where we need to be in 2030. Any thoughts on what needs to change? I mean, I think if we have to report on carbon emissions, I think that's a good thing. That would help, but I don't think that would solve it. What do you think could get us there?
I think it's a great question. I think that the movement right now with a lot of those executive orders and the funding that's available from not just the government, because it's going to trickle down. So it's at the federal level, but there are some state and local governments that are going to get some of that money too. And when you look at something like the GSA with their building stock, and you look at the federal government with their building stock, I think that if we just, and that money is short-lived. It's going to be spent in the next 8 years, and there's going to be contracts to do all those, and they're focusing on deep energy retrofits. That's the word. That's the word that they've said, along with electric vehicle charging, and then, but the biggest thing is those deep energy retrofits for all their aging buildings. And even in the proposals or the RFQs that we're looking at, they're talking about building envelope improvements too, which, I mean, we didn't even scratch the surface on that, but if you improve the envelope of the building, your systems, you might not even have to change your air conditioning systems. You can just save energy probably by the lower load, associated with infiltration. But I think that is going to be a huge stepping point, is getting all that money into the federal buildings and reducing the waste that's happening now.
I want to add a clarification on one of the slides you had for Title 24. You had the renewable energy and the irrigation systems.
Yeah.
That is correct. But it's also in the language there, it also says process equipment. So like when I do laboratories, in one county where they were enforcing it in the Bay Area, we had to commission the autoclaves in the laboratories because they use steam, to clean
Fair, that's a good point. And thank you for that, because that is fair. And I always forget about labs, because usually the labs have a validation team, and we'll kind of do commissioning to a point, and it's not usually in our report. So it's a very fair point.
Another thing too is that language can also be controversial, is what we found, because we've had like kitchens, and that has to some effect process equipment. And so then it becomes a language argument between the AHJ and the green body, that has authority.
Yeah.
So
That's right. Questions, comments? Well, that's my last slide. We're not gonna get to 2030 unless we all work together. And that's why, like I say, I'm giving away my tips and tricks, because there's not enough of us out there right now. And I know everybody's probably trying to hire too. You can't find the bodies to do all the work that you need to do. There's not enough of us right now, so we all need to make sure that I feel like this room is, our experts. We need to be the ones that are grabbing those RFPs and making sure that we're changing the language of our clients and educating them so that they can grab this money that's going to come down from federal, which is going to help offset the cost of their, it's all going to work. We've got a good bunch here. I think we're going to do it. I see in 2030, I'll see if I can present again and be like, hey, we met our goals. I'll ask Anna. All right, thank you.